Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to our webcast viewers, and thank you for joining us. My name is Fred Mifflin, President of the Canadian Club of Toronto, and I'm pleased to be your host today. Our club enjoys an impressive track record of profiling leading political, business, and cultural figures to share their ideas with us and to challenge our thinking. Today's guest speaker is a case in point. Before I formally introduce Patrick Brown, let me tell you about some of our upcoming events. Tomorrow, May 18th, Prem Watsa, founder, chairman, and chief executive officer of Fairfax Financial Holdings, will be at our podium as part of our Global Leaders Series to discuss entrepreneurialism in Canada. And on Wednesday, May 24th, National Chief Perry Bellegarde will be joined in conversation with CBC radio host Duncan McHugh to discuss reconciliation and the needs of First Nations communities in Canada. To order your tickets or to learn more about the club, please visit our website at canadianclub.org. You can also join the conversation via Twitter and Instagram by following us at CDNCLUBTO or by using that hashtag. I want to express special thanks to today's event sponsors, Bruce Power, represented by Simon Frechette, and the Insurance Bureau of Canada, represented by Don Forgeron. Thank you both for your generous support. I also want to acknowledge the young leaders who are with us today, thanks to BCE Inc. From the University of Toronto Department of Political Science, welcome and thanks for joining us. And now our guest speaker. The leader of the official opposition of Ontario addressed our podium a year ago, where he shared his plans for a stronger Ontario. Patrick Brown is now 2 years into his role as leader of the PC Party of Ontario. We're pleased to welcome him back to our podium. It's evident that he has a few things on his mind. These ideas are shaped in part by the many conversations he has been having with families and businesses as he travels across the province. As we all know, the cost of living is on an upward trajectory. Whether it's housing, energy, transportation, or food, prices in Ontario are heading up. The PC leader is concerned, and we'll hear why shortly. Patrick has dedicated his political career to addressing local, provincial, and federal issues. The MPP for Simcoe North entered political office in 2000 after he won a seat on Barrie City Council. 6 years later, he served the federal riding of Barrie on Parliament Hill. After being in federal politics for 9 years, he contested and won the Ontario PC Party leadership in 2015. With a focus on growth and renewal, his party has developed new platforms and plans to address these priorities. Affordability is high on that list. Patrick will share a few thoughts with us from the podium and then sit down with Toronto Sun Editor-in-Chief Adrian Batra to chat further about his solutions for a better Ontario. Adrian has worn many varied and accomplished hats in her career, from Armed Forces Lieutenant to a key player in Toronto's mayoral election. She joined the Sun Group in 2011, where she worked as a columnist, editor, and now editor-in-chief of the Toronto Sun and 24 Hours Toronto. As I mentioned earlier, if you have any comments or questions, please fill out one of the Q&A cards on your tables, and one of our staff will collect them. So with that, Patrick, and later Adrian, welcome. The Canadian Club of Toronto's podium is yours.
Well, thank you, Fred, for that introduction. It is great to be with you back at the Canadian Club, and thank you for wearing a blue tie for me today, Fred. I appreciate it. I'm actually wearing a yellow tie today because, for those who don't know, our finance critic, Vic Fideli, is always proud to support yellow, and today we're voting on the budget. So I wanted to recognize a few folks who are here with us today. We have a number of members of our Ontario PC caucus, and if I could ask all the MPPs to stand so we can recognize you. I'd be remiss also not to recognize three other people very briefly. Former Premier Ernie Eves, it's always an honor to have you join us. And secondly, my good friend Carolyn Maroney, and I think her work on the Shoebox Project, helping vulnerable women, is inspiring, and it's great to have you here today. And last but not least, my youngest sister, Fiona, who's a lawyer at Aird & Barreless, and part of the challenge of being a sister to a politician is you get dragged out to lots of events. So thank you, Fiona, for once again coming. Now, shortly, I will be joined by Adrian Batra, who will be here for the fireside chat, even though there's no actual fire on the stage. Maybe we'll work on that for a future Canadian Club speech. But our caucus was feeling pretty fired up today in the legislature. That's why we're a little bit delayed. 30 minutes ago, we voted on the provincial budget, and a budget that I really believe did not serve Ontario's interests. It comes down to a basic question. Are you better off today than you were a year ago? Is your job safe? Do you have extra cash at the end of the month? Are you able to afford a relaxing vacation? Some of you here may be able to say yes to all those questions, but a growing number of people in our province, this great province, are not that lucky. In fact, they are in trouble. They aren't putting funds away. They can't make ends meet, and in many cases, they're choosing between basic essentials like food and power. That's not the Ontario I know. That's not the Ontario that I want, nor am willing to accept, and you shouldn't either. We are at a pivotal time in our province's history. After 14 years of failed Liberal policy, we have a have-not province. You know, to Premier Eves, you couldn't even imagine that thought, that Ontario, the mighty Ontario, would be receiving equalization payments. Ontario is no longer the economic freight train every province once envied. The reality today is people are working harder, paying more, and getting less. Families are living paycheck to paycheck. They're cutting corners and hoping to catch a break that never seems to come. That break won't come if we continue down the current path. For 14 years, our Liberal friends have pushed a reckless spending agenda that we can't pay for. And despite warning signs and expert advice, they continue to plow ahead with patchwork policies and rushed billion-dollar decisions. Our party won't and can't support that. The budget that we just voted against is anything but balanced. In fact, the Liberals hid an operating deficit of $5 billion. Our debt has reached $312 billion. Astonishing. This summer, Ontario will be celebrating its 150th anniversary of Confederation. To commemorate this historic occasion, the Liberal government has saddled our province with $150 billion of additional debt. In the last 14 years, under this Liberal government, Ontario has accumulated more debt than we did in the previous 136 years. That isn't the kind of legacy any government should be proud of. In the first 136 years, money was spent towards building the province, making the province stronger. Our highways, our public transit system, our universities, our colleges. There was a legacy that you could be proud of. And I look at Premier Eves, and you can look at examples like the commitment on the Northern Medical School. Or I'm sure Steve Paikin is here, I understand. He's an encyclopedia of Ontario history. I just read his book on Premier Davis. And when you read that book, you heard about the incredible building, the incredible investment. And you looked at the college system, and you saw that you were getting value for your money. When you look at the last 14 years, what have we got? What value have we got? And we haven't seen that. We have very little to show for it. This money hasn't gone towards strengthening our foundation for long-term prosperity, but instead it is government waste and scandal. And it means every person in Ontario, including your kids and grandkids, now owes over $22,000 plus interest. We pay $12 billion a year just in interest payments, $1 billion a month. This is money not going to hospital care for our seniors, not reducing wait times, not improving your kids' education, or going to transit or fixing roads. It's not going to therapies like autism services that we desperately need. We are simply throwing money away. And it's important to note, interest rates are low. Can you imagine the devastation we would face if those rates went up? Remember, it's not ideology that bankrupts governments, it's the math of rising interest costs. But who really pays the price? We do, of course, and we will pay it day to day. Your kids will be in a worse position. Think about the stat. We owe more in Ontario than any other province or state. Can you imagine passing that on to your children? And yet this government continues to push ahead stubbornly with their agenda. Later this week, we will have a vote on the Liberal hydro borrowing scheme. We will vote against that too. The Liberals aren't fixing the hydro mess that they created. They're not fixing the structural problems. They're simply giving a small, temporary break in time for the next election. Actually, yesterday in question period, I was asking the Minister of Energy about it, and he said, we're focused on the short term. I couldn't believe that was even an answer. How can that be an answer to the question about the serious structural challenges that we have in hydro? Under this Liberal hydro scheme, hydro rates will spike after the election to the highest the province has ever seen. And this isn't the opposition trying to estimate how much hydro rates are going to go up. This is a leaked Liberal cabinet document that shows hydro rates are going to skyrocket after the election. Last week, this was confirmed. Their response to their own document was, well, it's not very recent. It was only March. And then they quoted me the 2013 long-term energy plan. So get this, the document in March of 2017 isn't recent, and instead they want to quote one from 2013. It's simply ridiculous, and it's one of the many reasons we cannot support this bill, because it will make hydro rates higher. Despite all the challenges our province is facing, whether it is debt or the skyrocketing hydro rates, Ontario is still Ontario. We are still home to the most talented, hardest working, and compassionate people. Our province is still home of equal opportunity, where anybody who puts in the work and sweat should be able to achieve their dreams. And I know that given the right circumstances, Ontario will once again be a place where people want to create good-paying jobs and where good-paying jobs want to stay. Ontario residents wouldn't dream of giving up on our great province, and they don't expect their government to give up on it either. But in order for that to happen, we need a government that will work hard for a better future. And only the Ontario PC Party represents change for the better. That's why I'm running to become the next Premier of Ontario, because I believe life is harder under the Liberals. I'm running because I believe Ontario can do so much more to help people make life a little bit easier, a little more affordable for families. Because I believe Ontario residents should be treated with respect, beginning with respect for their hard-earned dollars. Because I want Ontario families who work hard to pay less and get ahead. And that, my friends, would be better. Better for families, better for seniors, better for businesses, better for Ontario. And that is what this goal is all about, to make sure that families and Ontarians are better off. And on that note, I'm looking forward to our fireside chat. Thank you, Adrienne.
Okay. All right. Well, good afternoon, everybody. I hope you can hear me. I'm very loud, so regardless if my mic goes down, I can project. Very good to see you. Obviously, you did touch on the fact that you were just a touch tardy because of a budget vote. So let's just quickly talk about that, because you touched on it in your speech. Why did you vote against this budget? Because you know exactly what the Liberals are going to say about you. Is you voted against healthcare, you voted against increasing in education funding, you voted against affordable housing, you did this, 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 and this. They're already probably putting together the commercials against you. So why did you do that?
Well, first of all, as I came in here, I was saying to Ernie, I said, can you believe they'd schedule a budget vote when I have to give a speech at the Canadian Club? And he said, no, I couldn't imagine us ever doing anything like that. But I was proud to vote against this budget, and I think it's important to tell Ontarians exactly what is wrong with this budget. It was a shell game. It was a house of cards. You know, first of all, how can there be a situation where you're out there bragging you have a balanced budget and debt's going up $34 billion over the next 3 years? So debt's going to skyrocket. They have found new ways to exclude debt. It's debt that's going to be on the OPG. It's off-budget spending. Like, they now use that as a common term, off-budget spending that's not included in the budget. Reminds me of their insurance goals. When they didn't meet them, they said it was a stretch goal. They find language to hide what they're doing, and we pointed it out. And kudos to our finance critic, Vic Fideli, who's been so eloquent in pointing this out. But the reality is, the Hydro One fire sale funds, remember we were promised that was to go towards infrastructure, is being used as one-time budget money. The Trudeau infrastructure funds is supposed to go to infrastructure, it's being used as one-time budget money. There was even a case where they were using a pension surplus that was the teacher's pension and OPSU, and they were counting that as revenue for the government. Ernie, could you imagine what the press would have done to you if you tried to count pension surplus funds? It's a fictional budget. We estimate that at the bare minimum, it's a $5 billion deficit, and it's scary because, as I said initially, we owe more than any people in Ontario right now, because of this government, we owe more than any other subnational jurisdiction in the world. And this is just going to make it worse.
We have a number of questions from the audience, but I'm going to just use my moderator's privilege for just a moment. You have talked about, this whole conversation is about affordability, making Ontario more affordable. You just talked about the debt, $303 billion is what it was the last second I checked. You are going to vote against the 25% reduction that the Liberals are proposing for Ontarians. Why wouldn't you and your caucus colleagues just vote in favor of it, just to give Ontarians just that little bit of relief, in spite of the fact that that deficit and that debt is being kicked down the road?
The reality is this borrowing plan, they call it a fair hydro plan, that sounds nice, but it's borrowing money. In their own plan, it's going to skyrocket right after the election. Why would I buy into that hoax? In their own estimates, you could see going beyond 61% increases. Astonishing. So I will not sign up for a hoax. I will not support a hoax. It's an election gimmick, and that's not right. I want the government to address the structural problems in hydro. And I've got up in the legislature for the last 2 years and said, when are you going to rein in excessive executive salaries? How is it right that we're paying the Hydro One CEO $4.7 million a year, and in Quebec, it's $450,000? You know what the Premier's response to that was? Well, that's what they pay in corporate America. That's not what they pay here in Canada. When they had the Sunshine List, you could have called that the Hydro List. But they actually passed a motion so that the hydro workers are no longer on the Sunshine List. It's incredible how they sort of want to hide some of the structural problems. Let's talk about the bigger issue on generation. We have signed so many bad contracts, so many bad, brutal contracts, that we generate far more than we need. Look at the recent stats. 2015, we generated 144 terawatt hours. We consumed 137, and that's excluding all the renewables. Excluding all the renewables. So we have so much surplus energy, we have to give it away. We give it away to Michigan, Pennsylvania, Ohio, New York. I actually told the Premier in the legislature, I said, you've become the best Minister of Economic Development that the Northern United States has ever seen. Because when people are saying, how are they getting this cheap electricity in Michigan? It's Ontario. We're paying, in some cases, people 81 cents a kilowatt hour and then giving it away at 2 cents.
And they keep on signing these bad deals. Here's the incredible thing. We have so much surplus that we have hydroelectric facilities where we're spilling water. We're spilling water in Manitou, Merrickville, Niagara Falls. We are paying to spill water. And the government says this is about green energy. These bad contracts are about green energy. Water power is green. We're not using our own Ontario green energy, and we've signed expensive foreign contracts for energy we do not need that we have to give away. That's the scandal. You look at the 30 mega deals, the 30 mega renewable deals. The Ontario Liberal Party received $1.3 million in donations from those companies for energy we did not need. And right now, the day after this borrowing plan to pay for their past mistakes, they proceeded with 1,100 more of these contracts. 1,100 more. It's astonishing. LRP2 still going full steam ahead. More of this mega renewable generation that we do not need. So we're going to continue to point out the real structural flaws in hydro, and we're not going to buy in or support any election gimmicks because it's the wrong thing for Ontario.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, I just want to remind you that there are pieces of paper on your table. If you would like to submit a question, please fill it out. There must be a lot of doctors in the room today because I can barely read this handwriting. But I think I found a couple that I can sort of amalgamate into one. And it's generally about the affordability of healthcare in Ontario and in Canada in general. Well, let's talk about the province of Ontario. It's the one area that continues to skyrocket as far as how much money we're putting in, but not necessarily seeing the outcomes. Mm-hmm. So the question being posed to you is that this individual feels that affordability is a loaded word. But with respect to healthcare, what does affordability and sustainability mean to you in Ontario?
Well, first of all, I think it means spending every healthcare dollar carefully, making sure that we get value for money. And our health critic, Jeff Urich, and our PAC co-chair, Francesca Grosso, are doing an incredible job at looking for areas we can get better value for money. What I mean by that, well, we spend too much on administration in healthcare. I want to make sure that every cent possible gets to frontline care. And people are saying, how is it possible that in Ontario, where they're spending all this new money, spending like drunken sailors essentially, and yet they fired 1,600 nurses? They're shutting down wings of small town hospitals. How can that happen when you've got a government that spends with no end? Well, part of the problem is they're spending in the wrong areas. The Auditor General's report pointed out that in home care alone, it's 39% that we spend on administration now. 39%. And right now, they're doubling down. All this healthcare legislation, by the way, that messy writing from physicians, they haven't actually asked physicians for their opinion on any of this major healthcare reform. But on the recent changes, about having all these new sublins, it's more administration. 80 more executive paper pushers. They're going to have these high-priced healthcare VPs. It's incredible. If you look at the administration 14 years ago compared to now, there's a real cost for frontline care. And so I want to make sure that the precious dollars we have in healthcare actually get to patient care. It's about patients.
We're going to sort of shift gears a bit here and ask more about the general election, which we assume is going to be in June, unless something unforeseen happens, June of 2018. The question to you is, what do you believe can be done to mobilize youth and increase millennial engagement that the party has generally struggled with, and particularly what happened in the last federal election?
Well, first of all, I think it would help if the Toronto Sun was a little harder on the Liberals. Some of their front page headlines are just too...
Some of my colleagues in the media could help out with that.
Too objective. But in all seriousness, I travel the province nonstop, and I'm meeting young people nonstop. And I think a real concern of young Ontarians right now is they want to actually have a job. And the real worry is we have this massive skills mismatch. So you've got jobs in Ontario. According to the Chamber of Commerce, $3 billion worth of actually revenue we lose the government for jobs that are available that we can't fill. And so if you're a young person, I worry there's not a lot of optimism about the path ahead. And I want to change that. I want to be able to speak to young Ontarians and say, we're going to fix our education system, we're going to link it to employment, and we're going to be determined to make sure that you live in a province where you can actually get a job, because it's beyond simply affording a house in Toronto, which is impossible now. This affordability crisis, some of the greatest victims of that affordability crisis are young people. And so we need to change that narrative. We need to make sure there's opportunity for young people. I hope that the Ontario PC Party can speak to that dream that we have.
Okay, I'm going to push you on that a little bit, because you have said you want to implement a revenue-neutral carbon pricing. What does that mean? Is that a carbon tax? Is that cap and trade? What does that mean? Because it was going to cost more and more for goods and services with regardless of whatever cap and trade scheme is hatched.
So it's a great question in the context of young people, too. I get that the environment is very important to young Canadians. I get that climate change is something they take seriously. I do, too. I mentioned that at a previous speech that one of the reasons I got involved in politics is I had a class project on acid rain, and I wrote the Prime Minister of the day, Brian Rooney, by the way, Carolyn, a letter and said, what is Canada going to do on acid rain? And a lot of young Canadians today are concerned that we're not doing enough. And so I get the fact they want us to help on the environment, but I think it's important we do it in a way that is balanced with the economy and done in a way that is not abusing people's goodwill on the environment. What I mean by that is right now, of course, Justin Trudeau has asked all the provinces, mandated all the provinces to have a cap and trade or a carbon price. And my worry is that some governments will take advantage of it. It will be used as a cash grab, as a revenue tool. Here in Ontario, the government's going to get $1.9 billion a year as revenue. And they've already announced that it's going to be used for environmental projects. They've actually, you look at the list of what they're using it on, it's stuff they've already announced. It's a shell game. They're taking advantage of people's goodwill in the environment to use it to simply to prop up their budget. It's taking advantage of young Ontarians who care about the environment. What I've said is that we're going to have a carbon price, that it should not be a revenue tool for government, that every cent should be returned to the general public. It cannot be taken advantage of, and unfortunately right now in Ontario, that's what I see is happening.
All right, let's stick on the vein of millennials and young kids out there. Someone out there would like to know that if you are elected, would you remove the free tuition for lower income students? If so, why? And if not, why not?
So I want to make going to post-secondary, pursuing post-secondary education as easy as possible. In last year's budget, there was a lot of hoopla about free tuition. The reality is there's no new money. The reality is it was changing existing programs, existing tax credits, and trying to package something that looked like it would be a good photo op. And so I think a lot of Ontario students are going to be disappointed in September when they realize that this doesn't have the reach and the help that they thought. The conversation I want to have on education is this. How do you make sure that that young person going to university and college actually gets a job? What I mean by that is this. There's no point of going to university or college if you're going to end up unemployed. The goal of going to post-secondary education is to make sure that what you study, you can use those tools. Last year, we graduated 9,000 teachers for 5,000 teaching positions. We subsidize degrees and diplomas that we do not need. Conversely, there are areas where we desperately need young people to follow those paths. I look at the skilled trades. We need more people in the skilled trades, and yet we're struggling. Right now, the government uses their advertising budget to run hydro vanity ads. Maybe we should be sending a message to young people and to their parents that there are some great jobs in the skilled trades. Entice young people down that path. How about coding? How about computer programming? We know there are lots of new job opportunities, but we can't get enough young people into those education pathways. Just last week, I was in Waterloo, touring the University of Waterloo, looking at their incredible engineering program. I couldn't believe it when they told me that last year they turned away 2,500 students who got over 90%. Imagine that. There are engineering jobs out there. I want to make sure that if you're a smart person, and you're a passionate young Ontarian, and you want to become an engineer, we should make sure that we have, and there's jobs there, we should have that linkage between employment and education. And so look at where there's opportunities for jobs, and that's where I want to use the tools of government to make sure that we can invest in those partnerships.
There's been some knock against you and your party that you haven't come out with a specific policy platform on every aspect, notably on the issue of hydro. I think you've just touched on a couple of the issues that you would try to implement if you were to be successful in the next election. Perhaps, though, you could give a few more specifics with respect to what a PC government would do to clean up this hydro mess, make it more affordable, make it more sustainable. I know you already mentioned the water runoff and the spillage, but there have to be some other things done specifically with the contracts that have been signed.
Mm-hmm. So a great question, and last year I probably gave 1,000 speeches around the province on my 4 pillars of economic development, how to get Ontario back on track, and I think the Canadian Club was one of the venues where I gave that 4 pillars speech. I think right now the Liberals are trying to goad me into coming up with some policy out of left field that they can attack. They can't defend their own record. How could they? We're a have-not province that we've been credit downgraded 3 times. Of course they want to make the election about someone else. But this next election is going to be a referendum on their record, and it's a poor record. And where we stand on hydro is no secret. We've been asking about it every single day in the legislature for years. So what I'm going to do differently, well, those bad contracts they won't look at, I will look at. I'll stop signing new deals. Look at those 30 mega bad contracts. People say, well, if it was so easy, why wouldn't they look at it? Thanks to the work of one of our caucus members, we actually got one of the contracts, the Samsung deal. In the Samsung deal, they could have got out of $1.5 billion of surplus electricity. They chose not to. They chose to blow the $1.5 billion, but they didn't want to appear like they were walking away from their Green Energy Act. And by the way, I don't even like to say Green Energy Act because we call it the Bad Contracts Act. Because if it was green energy, we wouldn't be spilling Ontario water power. So of course we're going to look at those bad deals. And right now, they won't even make the contracts public. Why are they hiding the contracts? Why are they not making them public? I think there's a reason, because they realize that you could look at some of these contracts. You could look at some of these bad deals, just like the Samsung one. And the reason they don't want to look at these contracts, and if there is similar exit clauses like there was in the Samsung deal, the reason they don't want to look at those bad deals that they signed is because they're their friends. You heard me say earlier today, $1.3 million in donations to the Ontario Liberal Party. These are their friends, their donors. Of course they're not going to look at their own. But the biggest change, we have this massive overgeneration. In what world are they still signing new contracts? How can they, a day after their borrowing plan, their Fair Hydro plan, a day after proceed with 1,100 more? How can they possibly, how can they look Ontarians in the face and keep on signing these deals, knowing that we're giving it to Michigan, Pennsylvania, Ohio, New York, knowing that we're giving it away? We are charging Ontarians to subsidize your competitors. And it's this global adjustment. You want to talk about hydro rates, getting them down? They hide all these bad deals in the global adjustment. I can't get the money back that we lost on gas plant. That's gone, and that's hidden in your hydro bill. But what I can change is making sure that we don't continue to charge you for this massive overgeneration and continuing to have this, the government commit itself to more generation that we don't need.
Last week, Global News came out with a pretty explosive story with respect to Ontario's parole system, talking about the fact that there are over 43,000 offenders under community supervision, and the majority of them aren't being checked, they're reoffending, et cetera, et cetera. This is a challenge within criminal justice. It's perpetually underfunded. We've heard from OPSU. I know the Toronto Sun did some work on Waypoint facility, that it's underfunded, and there's not enough resources available to the staff there to ensure safety, frankly, of even the employees, but even of the inmates. So just generally speaking, law and order, that's what Conservatives are generally known for. What is it that you feel needs to be tackled with respect to the parole issue and the criminal justice system.
So sort of two different issues there. On the probation system, and then a Waypoint, I think, falls more into the mental health category. So let me speak to both. On the global expose on probation, it was horrifying. And everyone should watch that, Carolyn Jarvis's expose on what's happening on probation. You know, a lot of times in politics, you see the opposition leader demanding a government's minister's resignation quite frequently. I have not done that often. But last week I did ask for the Attorney General to resign over this. And the reason I went to that extent is how incompetently they've managed probation in Ontario should be horrifying to every Ontarian. 4,513 convicted criminals who have breached probation who are out there in our communities. We're talking about child sex predators. We're talking about violent criminals. Federally, if you breach probation and there's a warrant for your arrest, there's a team that goes out and does a home visit and brings you in. In the other provinces, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, Alberta, BC, if you breach provincial probation, there's going to be a home visit. In Ontario, the probation officers became a whistleblower on the government saying that they're not allowed right now to do that they want to go and make sure that a convicted criminal is not out loose in our community, and the government has been asleep at the switch. They have not acted. And just to give you an example of the type of cases they highlighted on this expose of Carolyn Jarvis, there was a case in Durham where there's someone convicted of child luring, and they told him just to report in. They can't do a home visit, just call in to a probation officer if you feel tempted to breach your probation. Self-reporting for convicted criminals? Like, give me a break. And that convicted criminal got caught trying to attempt to child lure again in a Durham public library. So the government's made a mess of probation. It needs to be fixed. It's one of the many things we need to fix if we have the honor to govern in a year.
So then let's expand then with respect to the mental health issue that we face in this country in general, because there are a couple of questions specifically on that. We know there's a shortage, there's not enough space, there's constant underfunding. How do you address that with all the other pieces that you are going to ultimately commit to Ontarians that you're going to do to fix all these broken systems?
We don't do enough on mental health, and ultimately, there's one taxpayer. And if you don't offer the proper support at the right point, you're going to be paying for it at some point in the system. And I think mental health is an example of that. We've seen every mental health facility in Ontario cut over the last number of years. Their staffing has been cut, their wait times have gone up. It's quite incredible that here we are on Bell Let's Talk Month, and we're saying, have the courage to come forward. And more people are coming forward, and that's a good thing. But how wrong is it that you have people coming forward and we're saying, we can help you in 6 months, we can help you in 8 months. The fact that wait times are becoming atrociously long, that's a travesty. And the reason I say, if you don't have the proper resources at the right point, you end up paying more, is look what's happening in municipalities right now. 40% of the police calls right now are mental health calls. So you've got police officers who are paid more in many cases than mental health workers, then waiting at a hospital for 8 hours to get help. There was a picture I was shown of the Hamilton Emerge where the Emerge, they couldn't get the ambulance in because it was all police cars. And that's paid out of a municipal budget. And so if the province doesn't do their job on mental health, then there's going to be a cost down the road. And I believe there's one area that we have to actually have significant provincial leadership. It's on mental health. I would note that in Hamilton, they've taken some real leadership. Now they're doing a partnership where they have a mental health worker responding to 911 calls. That's something that I think is exciting, and we should look at examples like that around the province, look at better ways to deal and help with mental health. And we're not meeting the demand today.
We only have a few minutes left. So one of the things that we know works in a campaign is what you stand for. It's nice for you to sit in front of these wonderful people that paid an absurd amount of money to hear you speak. But it's another thing to actually communicate that with voters, because I think if you were afforded the opportunity to have that with every single voter, they hear what you have to say, and you could sway them one way or the other. If I were to go out, stand on the subway, and ask random Torontonians, random Ontarians, what does Patrick Brown stand for? What's the answer going to be?
What my goal is after the next election, and I think a lot more Ontarians will know what we're all about during the course of the provincial election, I'd hope they say that Patrick Brown is committed to making Ontario a job-creating engine within Canada, that it's all about jobs. I'm going to create jobs. I'm going to make sure that we're competitive again. Because right now, on all the major fronts, whether it's red tape, whether it's hydro, whether it's getting product to marketplace, whether it's the skills mismatch, there is an Ontario disadvantage. And so there's one thing I want them to know about me is that I'm going to work day in, day out, and be determined to make sure that we have an Ontario advantage again.
Okay, and I'm not going to let you get off the hook without answering this last one. Next week, your colleagues, all your former Parliament Hill colleagues, are voting for a new leader. Who's it going to be?
I said Carolyn should run at the beginning.
Good answer. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
That's great.
She did let me off the hook. Thank you. Thank you, Jim.
My name is Paul Bonafero. I'm a partner at McCarthy Tetro and a board of director member here at the Canadian Club. On behalf of our club and all of you, let me first thank Adrian Batra for your masterful handling of the discussion and for not letting Patrick off the hook. We think you did a fabulous job, so thank you. And Patrick, my notes say Mr. Brown, I'll call you Patrick. On behalf of the Canadian Club of Toronto, I'd like to thank you for sharing your party's platform and creating a more affordable province in Ontario. The details, we believe, paint a hopeful picture of the possibilities that you wish to pursue sometime in the not-so-distant future. We all desire a province where businesses, families, and individuals can thrive and realize our full potential. And today, your plan acknowledges that there are challenges of the current market conditions, and it won't be easy, but we know you're up for the hard work. The solutions you outlined offer tangible approaches to minimizing threats while keeping Ontario fiscally strong. Thank you for sharing your optimism, your enthusiasm with us today. We know that these attributes have served you well in your approach to engaging constituents across the province, including during the current by-election in my great hometown of Sault Ste. Marie. Please accept our best wishes for continued success on your political leadership journey, and we wish you all the best. Thank you. Before we conclude, please join me in extending another round of applause and thanks to our sponsors today, Bruce Power and the Insurance Bureau of Canada. Thank you. We'd also like to thank MediaEvents.ca, Canada's online event space, and VVC for live streaming today's event. To learn more about the club, please visit our website at canadianclub.org. Please consider staying and joining us for our post-event networking reception right here in the ballroom. Thank you for your attendance today. This event is now adjourned.